What's up, everybody? My name is Andrew Mason, and this is going to be a quick tutorial on how to integrate BridgetownRB with Tailwind CSS, PurgeCSS, Sass, and Auto Prefixer and Purge. And I'm doing this in video form because it can be a little tricky, and there's a lot of different ways you can kind of go down this. So I thought doing this in a video would allow us to discuss it. So first off, I'm going to be using Ruby 2.7.2, Bridgetown 0.18.5, and Node 14.15.0. And if you want more information on kind of the dependencies you need, you can go to the BridgetownRB website, go to the documentation, installation guides, and it'll have some more information there. So I'm going to create a new Bridgetown site. And if you don't have Bridgetown installed, you can do gem install Bridgetown, and all that's on the on the Bridgetown site. So I'm going to create a new Bridgetown site. It's going to be called Bridgetown Tailwind CSS Sass Starter. And I've already run this command in another terminal window just so we don't have to sit here and watch it. So what that site looks like out of the gate is the site structure anyway is like this. So we have a Webpack config. We have our package.json with some files. We have our gem file. All our CSS and JavaScript are stored in front end. Here's our SCSS file and our JavaScript file, and all of our pages, components, data, layouts, images, posts, etc. are in source. So I'm going to go ahead and start up the Bridgetown server so we can see what we get out of the box. So as soon as that compiles for the first time, you'll see this. You're ready to go. Localhost 4000. Here we go. Sweet. So to get this working with Tailwind, we're going to need to add a few things. So we're going to add your Tailwind CSS auto prefixer at version 9, post CSS loader, which is a Webpack loader for PurgeCSS. And that's it for right this second. We're going to add another one in a few minutes. So this is going to install, and what we're going to do is first we're going to come in our Webpack config, and we need to add our post CSS loader here. All right. And that's should be the only change we need to make here. The other thing we're going to do is come into here, and I'm going to create a command called clean, which is going to run Bridgetown's clean command. Webpack build, I'm going to set the node env in here to equal production. And our deploy script is going to run yarn clean first, then Webpack build, then yarn build. All right, and I'm not going to get too into the specifics here, but all this is documented on the website. So the next thing we need to do is add Tailwind. So one thing we could do here is if we look over at the Tailwind website and using with preprocessors, this is just a side note, but if you want to add PostCSS import, the instructions are on here as well. But if you go down here, this is the kind of structure you need to use if you are going to add Tailwind directly into your SCSS file. Just like that. And what we're also going to do is run yarn tailwind init css -p, which will init a new Tailwind file, and it will also give us a PostCSS config file. We're going to drastically change that in a second, but their default's okay for right now. And here's our Tailwind file. All right, I'm going to start up our server. And if we look on localhost 4000, okay, we have Tailwind installed. If you can recognize it, what we're going to do real quick, just to make it more pronounced, is I'm going to add min h screen, and I'm going to add flex call. Then I'm going to add class equals flex1 here, so that the main section will take up any space of the footer the nav don't. Then in the footer, I'm just going to add class equals py6, and then we'll add bg gray 900 and text gray 100. And if we check back on our site, there we go. So now we know for a fact that Tailwind's working. And this could be a part where you stop, but you probably shouldn't, because we're going to do something really important in a second. So the one problem with this is if you run yarn deploy, which is going to run yarn clean. So PurgeCSS hasn't been set up, and Webpack is complaining because our CSS file is 2 megabytes, which is what Tailwind is out of the box. So setting up Tailwind purging the way Tailwind recommends, or actually through Tailwind, doesn't really work because of Webpack, and more specifically Webpack plus SCSS. So what we're going to do is solve that problem first, and I'm going to set purge layers by default false in here. Whoops. And then in here we're going to do enabled false, because we don't want Tailwind to purge our styles. And that should be good. And then if you look over here on Tailwind's website, controlling file size, they actually have a really great example of what you should do if you want to manually set up PurgeCSS. So what we're going to do is add the PurgeCSS package to our dev dependencies. All right. And then what we're going to do is take their file and copy it into our post.css config file. Now, the one difference we're going to need to make is up here. So the content, or where we're going to be looking, is going to be all the HTML files in source, all the liquid files, and all of the markdown files. And the last place is front-end JavaScript star.js. And that should give us all of our source files that we want to use. I'm also going to set output here, which will be output / Bridgetown / static / CSS, comma, and then I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. All right, and so down here we're saying get Tailwind and auto prefixer and only run PurgeCSS when the node env is production. So I'm going to save that. And now, if we run yarn deploy, we can see that our CSS file is now 9 kilobytes, which is great. So the other thing I'm going to recommend is up here in our index.scss file, is that you take this Tailwind stuff out and what we're going to actually do is create a Tailwind.css file, and we're going to, the contents of that are going to be coming directly off of Tailwind's website, which will be this. All right, and then we're going to go into our index.js, and we're going to port that file. Cool. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to make we're going to call this base SCSS just to show you that all the SCSS stuff still works. So we can do @import base.scss here. And we can come in here and let's set a default header. We'll @apply text 4XL, font bold, and then we'll do text blue 600 just for kicks. All right, and if we start up our server again and we go over here, once it is done, oops, there we go. There we go. You can see our stuff is being applied just like we think it's supposed to be. And I would kind of recommend you do this, especially because I really wouldn't recommend using SCSS with Tailwind and PostCSS. I would recommend just using PostCSS, just using CSS, and kind of doing this allows you to kind of start thinking in that way. Because you can also import files here as well. And what you need to do is exactly what was on the Tailwind documentation, where you would need to add PostCSS import, and then you can do this down here. But we're not going to do that for right now. Now that our site is configured a little bit, let's take a look. All right. And I am going to go ahead and git commit, initial commit, and then I'm going to do GitHub repo create Andrew M codes Bridgetown Tailwind CSS SaaS starter. It'll be a public. Create this, git push-u origin main. Now we're going to open up Netlify. New site from Git. Bridgetown. And it is right there. So our build command will be yarn deploy, and our publish directory will be output. And these are all in the Bridgetown documentation. Deploy site. And this will do a quick deploy. While we're here, I'm going to set this domain. Bridgetown Tailwind CSS SaaS starter. All right. So this will go in here and start deploying. And I'm going to pause the video for a second. All right, so our site just finished deploying, and I just want to highlight in here in the Netlify deploy log that CSS is only 9 kilobytes, so we know purge worked correctly. We can hit preview, and here's our site with Tailwind, purge, auto prefixer, and all the other stuff. So hopefully this was helpful, and if there are any questions, leave comments, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm @AndrewMCodes. Pull that up. There you go. Thanks for joining.